Tom had always dreamed of owning a place where he could escape from the rush of the city. After years of saving and working hard, he finally found a property that felt like a dream come true. It was a wide stretch of land surrounding a private lake. The water glistened under the sun like a sheet of silver, and the tall trees around it whispered with the wind. Birds often landed on the surface, dipping their beaks into the cool water, and at night the moonlight rested gently on the calm waves. Tom fell in love with it the very first time he saw it. The real estate agent had explained that the lake and all the land surrounding it were part of the property deed. No one else had any claim to it. It was his completely and without question. That assurance gave him peace because Tom liked his independence. He was not the type to be controlled by rules he did not agree with. He built a small but strong wooden cabin near the edge of the lake. It was simple, but it had everything he needed. The porch faced the water, so every morning Tom could sit with his coffee and watch the fog lift from the lake. In the evenings, he would rest on his rocking chair as the sky turned shades of orange and purple. The lake was more than just property to him. It was a companion, a place that gave him calm and joy after years of struggle. For several months, life went smoothly. Tom fixed up his cabin, planted a small garden near the back, and even built a dock that stretched into the water. He liked fishing early in the morning and sometimes swimming when the days were hot. Neighbors occasionally waved from the road, but no one disturbed him. He felt free and content, living in harmony with the land he had worked so hard to own. Then Karen arrived. She moved into a large house across the road, part of a newly built development. The neighborhood across the way was controlled by a homeowners association, commonly called the HOA. At first, Tom thought little of it. He had no connection to their community, and he knew his property stood apart from theirs. Karen, however, seemed to think otherwise. The first time she came to his door, she wore a neat blazer even though it was a warm day. She introduced herself as the president of the HOA with a smile that looked practiced. Her voice carried a certain tone, firm and slightly commanding, as if she was used to people listening to her without question. "I wanted to welcome you," she said, looking around his yard as if inspecting it, "and also to let you know about our rules and dues. Since you live near the lake, you'll need to contribute to the maintenance. We keep everything around here orderly, and that includes the water and the land surrounding it." Tom looked at her calmly, though inside he felt a small spark of irritation. He had already gone through all the legal documents when he purchased the property. He knew with absolute certainty that no HOA had authority over his land. He replied in a polite but firm voice, "I appreciate the visit, but I'm not part of the HOA. The lake and the land around it belong to me. I have the deed to prove it. There's no shared maintenance and no dues. Everything you see here is privately owned." For a moment, Karen's smile faltered. She blinked, then shook her head as if she had misheard. "That can't be right," she said. "The lake is part of the community. Everyone who uses it has to follow the rules. It's written in our guidelines. If people want to fish, swim, or even sit by the water, they need approval. You'll have to pay your share like everyone else." Tom did not raise his voice. He only repeated what he knew to be true. "Karen, this land is not part of your community. I bought it before the new development even started. Your guidelines don't apply here. I am the sole owner. The lake belongs to me." The confidence in his tone seemed to unsettle her. For the first time since she arrived, she looked unsure. She glanced toward the lake, then back at him. It was as if she struggled to accept what he said, but Karen was not the kind of person to back down easily. She straightened her shoulders and replied, "I'll need to see proof. Until then, I expect you to respect the rules. This is a shared space, and we can't allow anyone to ignore our system. It wouldn't be fair to the other residents." Tom gave a small nod. "I have no problem showing proof. I'll get the documents from my files. When you see them, there will be no doubt left." Karen left with a polite but tight smile. As she walked away, Tom noticed how stiff her posture had become. He knew she was not pleased. It was clear to him that Karen liked to be in control, and the idea of someone living outside her authority bothered her greatly. Later that evening, Tom pulled out the folder where he kept all his important papers. He held the property deed in his hand, reading the clear description of boundaries. The words confirmed exactly what he had told Karen. The lake and the land surrounding it belonged to him alone. He felt a quiet satisfaction, but also a sense that this was only the beginning of something larger. The next morning, Tom saw Karen again. She stood near the road with two other residents from the new development. They spoke in low voices, pointing toward the lake and shaking their heads. Tom could not hear what they said, but he could guess. He decided not to worry. The truth was on his side. Still, he felt a small unease, knowing that people like Karen rarely gave up easily. He had bought this place for peace and freedom, but now it seemed that his independence was about to be tested. As the sun set that day, Tom sat on his porch, watching the golden light reflect across the water. The lake remained calm and still, but he knew a storm was building just beyond its shores. The days after Karen's first visit passed quietly on the surface, but Tom sensed that something was shifting around him. He was not a man who imagined trouble where none existed. He preferred to spend his mornings by the lake, fishing with patience, and his afternoons tending to the small garden he had planted behind his cabin. But the glances from across the road, the murmurs of neighbors walking together, and the way Karen's car often slowed near his driveway told him that she was not letting the matter rest. Tom had seen people like her before. Confident, outspoken, always eager to prove they held authority even where none existed. He thought perhaps she might cool down after checking her HOA records, but he was wrong. Karen returned 1 week later, this time holding a folder in her hands. She did not knock gently. Her hand rapped sharply on the wooden door of his cabin, as if announcing a formal inspection. Tom opened it slowly, calm as ever. "I've brought the guidelines," Karen said, lifting the folder like a trophy. "This clearly states that the lake and the surrounding property are part of our community. You need to follow the same rules as everyone else." Tom motioned for her to step onto the porch. He did not want her inside his cabin. The porch was neutral ground, and besides, it faced the lake that told its own truth. He took the folder and looked through it. The papers described rules about lawn care, building paint colors, and restrictions on what could be placed in front yards. There were also sections about shared spaces, including parks and small artificial ponds built within the development. But Tom quickly noticed something. None of the maps included his lake. None of the documents mentioned his plot of land. "This doesn't cover my property," Tom said, handing the folder back. "The lake isn't part of your development. Your documents show only the areas inside your neighborhood. My land is outside those lines." Karen's lips tightened. She was not used to being challenged so directly. "You might think that," she said, "but everyone around here sees the lake as part of our community. People have been using it. Children play near the shore. Families walk the trails. You can't just claim it all for yourself." Tom's voice remained steady. "I don't claim it, I own it. That's not a matter of opinion, it's a matter of law. I have the deed in my files, and if you wish, I can bring it to show you." Karen looked at him, her eyes narrowing. "We'll see about that," she said at last. Then she turned and walked back across the road, her steps quick and sharp. That evening, Tom sat on his porch once more. The lake shimmered in the fading sunlight, calm as ever, yet he felt the storm inside the silence. He knew Karen was preparing for something bigger. The following days proved him right. First came the signs, literally. Karen and a group of neighbors hammered small signs into the ground near the entrance of the road, leading to Tom's property. The signs read, "Community Lake HOA members only." Tom saw them as he drove home from the grocery store. He stopped his truck, pulled the signs out of the ground, and placed them gently into the bed of the vehicle. He did not argue with anyone that day. He simply removed the signs and brought them back to his cabin. Next came the visitors. A group of children from the development wandered down to the lake, carrying fishing poles. Behind them, a pair of parents set up folding chairs as if the shore was a public park. Tom approached them with a friendly smile. "I'm sorry," he said, "but this lake is private property. I don't allow fishing without my permission. I'll have to ask you to leave." The parents looked uncomfortable, gathering their things quickly. One of them muttered something about Karen saying it was fine. Tom did not argue. He only watched them leave, knowing whose hand was behind this sudden increase in trespassing. By the end of the week, Karen came again. This time she brought two men with her, neighbors from across the street. They stood on his porch with crossed arms while Karen did the speaking. "You're upsetting the community," she declared. "People have enjoyed this lake for years. You can't just shut them out. It doesn't matter what your papers say. If you keep removing signs and chasing families away, the HOA will take action." Tom looked at the three of them, his expression calm but firm. "I'm not upsetting anyone. I'm protecting my property. If you or anyone else wants to use the lake, you'll need my permission. That's not me being difficult. That's me following the law. I have no problem being neighborly, but I will not surrender my rights. One of the men stepped forward, looking uncomfortable. Maybe we should let him be, Karen, he said quietly. If it's his property, we shouldn't push it. Karen shot him a sharp look that silenced him instantly. She turned back to Tom. You'll regret this, she said. Then she stormed off the porch, her allies following behind. Tom knew at that moment that the conflict had grown beyond a simple disagreement. Karen was determined to claim control, and she was willing to stir the entire neighborhood against him. That night, Tom pulled out his property deed once again. He studied the lines and boundaries carefully. Every word confirmed his ownership. Yet he also realized that being right on paper was not enough. He needed to be prepared for Karen's next move. Sure enough, the next move came faster than expected. 2 days later, Tom returned from a trip into town to find a group of neighbors standing near the edge of his lake. They were holding trash bags, rakes, and buckets as if performing a cleanup project. At the center of it all stood Karen, giving instructions. What's going on here? Tom asked, stepping out of his truck. Karen turned, her smile wide and confident. Community service, she replied. We're maintaining the lake area. This is part of our HOA activity. Since you won't cooperate, we've taken it upon ourselves to keep the space clean and safe. Tom walked closer, his boots crunching on the gravel. This is trespassing, he said firmly. You can't organize projects on my land. You all need to leave right now. Some of the neighbors looked uncertain, shifting on their feet, but Karen lifted her chin proudly. If you call it trespassing, then go ahead and report it. We'll see how far you get. For the first time, Tom felt genuine frustration rising in his chest. He took a deep breath, then pointed toward the road. Everyone here needs to leave. I won't ask again. If you come back without my permission, I'll call the sheriff. The neighbors hesitated. A few whispered among themselves. Finally, one woman said softly, Maybe we should go. I don't want trouble. Slowly, the group began to disperse, though Karen lingered. She gave Tom a cold look, her eyes narrowing with determination. You think you've won, she said, but this isn't over. The HOA always gets its way. She turned and walked off, her words hanging in the air like a warning. That night, Tom sat by the lake with his deed resting on the table beside him. He realized that Karen would not stop until she was forced to. Her confidence came not from facts, but from habit. She was used to people giving in, and when they resisted, she pushed harder. Tom, however, was not like the others. He had built his life around patience, strength, and the steady belief that truth always stood firm against pressure. The lake reflected the stars above, calm and still. But Tom knew the calm would not last. Karen had made her move, and soon he would have to make his. The morning after Karen and her group tried to clean the lake, Tom woke up earlier than usual. The sky was still dark, but he could not sleep. His mind kept circling the same thought. Karen would not stop until she was forced to face undeniable proof. Words and warnings had not shaken her confidence. She was used to bending people with pressure and persistence. If he wanted peace back, he needed to act carefully and firmly. Tom made himself coffee and sat on the porch, watching the thin mist rise over the still water. The lake looked as calm as always, but to him it now symbolized a battlefield. It was not a battlefield of fists or shouting, but of patience, facts, and truth. He pulled the folder containing his deed from the table beside him. The papers were old but clear, with official stamps, signatures, and a detailed map that showed the entire boundary of his land. The lake and every foot around it lay within those lines. He studied the map again, tracing the edge with his finger. He felt steady reassurance. He was not imagining his rights. They were solid and written in law. Still, he knew Karen would find some way to argue unless the truth came from a voice she could not challenge. By midday, Tom drove into town and visited the county office. He waited patiently in line, holding his folder. When it was his turn, he spoke with the clerk at the desk. I'd like to confirm property boundaries, Tom said. I've had a neighbor making claims that don't match what I own. The clerk nodded, took his documents, and entered the details into the computer. A few moments later, she brought out the official records. Yes, she said, pointing to the map. The lake is entirely on your property. You own it, and no homeowners association can place rules on it. They have no authority here. Tom thanked her. He requested certified copies of the map and deed, stamped by the county. When he left the office, he carried them in a sealed envelope like a weapon of truth. That evening, as the sun lowered over the trees, Tom saw Karen again. She was walking with two women from the neighborhood stopping near his driveway. Tom did not wait this time. He walked down the gravel path to meet them. "Karen," he said, holding the envelope, "I went to the county office today. I now have certified proof that this lake and the surrounding land belong to me alone. The HOA has no rights here. I suggest you stop this before things get worse." Karen laughed lightly, though her eyes flickered with unease. "You think a few papers will stop me? People around here trust the HOA. They trust me. If you keep acting like this, you'll look like the problem, not us." Tom opened the envelope carefully and showed the documents to her. The official stamps glinted in the fading light. "This is not opinion. This is law. If you continue trespassing or spreading false claims, you'll be in violation. I don't want conflict, but I will not be bullied." The two women with Karen leaned closer to read the documents. One of them whispered, "She's right, Karen. Look at the stamps. This is official." Karen snapped the folder shut with her hand, then quickly released it when Tom gave her a sharp look. She straightened her shoulders and said coldly, "Fine, you've made your point. But don't think this is over. You can't hide a lake forever. People will keep coming." She turned and walked away briskly, the two women following. Tom stood there quietly. He knew she had seen the truth, but she was too stubborn to admit defeat. Yet something in her eyes told him she was shaken. For the next week, the lake remained calm. No signs appeared. No groups gathered. Tom began to think maybe the matter had settled at last. He returned to his routine, tending to his garden and fishing in the cool mornings. But on the 8th day, he noticed something unusual. Tire tracks in the dirt near the lake's edge. Someone had driven down during the night. When he checked further, he found trash near the dock, fast food wrappers, empty bottles, and cigarette butts. It was unlike the quiet families who had come before. This felt intentional, almost like sabotage. Tom cleaned the mess and shook his head. He knew who had stirred this. Karen had failed with signs and cleanup projects, so now she had turned to subtle harassment. She wanted to make his life uncomfortable, hoping he would give up. Instead of anger, Tom felt a growing determination. He installed a set of trail cameras around the lake, hidden in the trees. They were small and silent, but they could capture clear images of anyone trespassing. 2 nights later, the cameras did their job. Tom woke early and checked the footage. On the screen, he saw a group of teenagers parking near the shore and laughing as they tossed trash into the water. At the edge of the frame, he caught a familiar figure watching from the road, Karen. She did not join the teenagers, but she stood with her arms crossed, nodding as if giving silent approval. Tom sighed, then carefully saved the footage to a secure drive. He now had more than papers. He had evidence of Karen encouraging trespassing. The following morning, Tom drove to the sheriff's office. He explained the situation, showing the deed and the camera footage. The sheriff listened carefully. "You've been more than patient," the sheriff said. "This footage makes things clear. No one has the right to disturb your property, especially not under the direction of someone from the HOA. I'll pay them a visit." When Tom returned home later that day, he felt a heavy weight lift from his shoulders. For weeks he had handled Karen's games alone, but now the law itself was standing beside him. That evening, as he sat on the porch, he heard the sound of voices across the road. He looked up and saw the sheriff's vehicle parked outside Karen's house. Karen stood in her yard, arms flailing as she argued, but the sheriff remained calm, speaking firmly. A small crowd of neighbors gathered, watching. Tom did not hear the words, but he could imagine. The sheriff was likely explaining that the lake was private property, that Karen had no right to interfere, and that further trespassing would bring legal consequences. Karen's voice rose higher, sharp and angry, but her audience was no longer nodding with support. The neighbors exchanged uneasy looks. Some shook their heads. The sheriff finally stepped back into his vehicle, leaving Karen standing red-faced in the yard. Tom knew the message had been delivered. Later that night, as the crickets sang and the lake shimmered under the moonlight, Tom sat quietly on the dock. He felt tired but at peace. The papers in his hand, the footage on his camera, and the law on his side had all come together to show the truth. Karen had pushed hard, but now her influence was cracking. Still, Tom did not celebrate too soon. He had learned enough about Karen to know that she was not one to surrender gracefully. She had lost one battle, but in her mind the war was still open. As he looked at the still water, Tom whispered to himself, "The lake belongs to me, and I will protect it." The stars above reflected in the water, countless and calm, as if they too bore silent witness to his promise. The quiet after the sheriff's visit did not last long. For a few days Tom felt a welcome calm. No neighbors wandered down to the lake. No strange cars left tire marks on the dirt path. Karen's house across the road looked unusually still, her curtains drawn, her car absent during the day. Tom allowed himself to believe, even for a moment, that perhaps the confrontation had ended. But Karen was not the kind of person to back away forever. When she lost ground, she looked for another way to push forward. One Friday morning, Tom was drinking his coffee on the porch when he heard the sound of heavy engines. He stepped to the edge of the railing and saw a truck pulling a trailer down the road. The trailer carried a portable dock and several canoes. Behind it came two vans filled with people wearing bright shirts that read, HOA Community Project. They parked at the entrance near his driveway. Karen stepped out of the lead van, clipboard in hand, a wide smile on her face. "Good morning, Tom," she called as if they were friends. "We're here for our lake recreation project. The community voted to build a shared dock and start a canoe program. Isn't that exciting?" Tom set his cup down slowly, his jaw tightening. He walked toward her with calm steps. "Karen, you've been warned by the sheriff. This is private property. You and your group cannot build anything here." Karen tilted her head, her smile never fading. "This isn't about you. This is about the neighborhood. We've invested money and time. Everyone is expecting this. You can't stand in the way of progress." Tom folded his arms. "Watch me." The group behind her shifted uneasily. Some people looked confused. One man raised his hand and asked, "Wait, I thought the HOA owned the lake. Does he really own all this?" Karen shot him a sharp look but answered quickly, "Of course it belongs to the community. Don't listen to him. He just doesn't want to cooperate." Tom sighed. He turned back toward his cabin, walked inside, and returned with a folder in his hands. He held up the certified deed and map, his finger pointing clearly to the boundary lines. "This is the truth. The county confirmed it. The sheriff confirmed it. If you set one piece of that dock on this land, you will all be trespassing," the group murmured. Some began backing away. A few looked at Karen uncertainly. Karen's smile faltered for only a second before she recovered. She raised her voice louder now, speaking not just to Tom but to the crowd. "He is selfish. He thinks one man can block an entire community. He wants to sit here by himself and keep this lake locked away when families could enjoy it. Do you really want to let one stubborn person control everything?" Her words carried emotion, but Tom could see the effect was weaker than before. The neighbors had seen the sheriff at her door. They had seen the documents. Her authority was cracking. Tom held his ground. "This isn't selfishness. It's ownership. You can enjoy the lake if you ask permission, but you will not build anything here without my approval." A long silence followed. Finally, one woman stepped forward from the group. "Karen, I don't think we should do this. If it's his land, we can't force him. We'll only get into trouble." Another man nodded in agreement. "I didn't sign up to break the law. I thought this was an official project. I'm leaving." One by one, people began returning to their vehicles. Karen's smile cracked for good now. Her face tightened with anger as she realized her plan was collapsing in front of everyone. She turned back to Tom, her voice sharp. "You may have scared them off, but I'm not done. You'll regret standing against me." She stormed back to her van, slammed the door, and drove away, the rest of the convoy following behind her in silence. Tom stood alone by the driveway, watching the dust settle from their tires. He felt relief but also a strange heaviness. He knew Karen's pride had taken another blow, and people like her did not forgive easily. That night, as the crickets sang by the water, Tom checked the trail cameras again. Nothing unusual appeared. The lake shimmered under the moonlight, peaceful and beautiful. Yet he could not shake the feeling that something bigger was coming. The following week proved him right. On Tuesday morning, Tom received a letter in the mail. It was thick, folded carefully, and stamped with the HOA's logo. He opened it at his kitchen table, reading each line slowly. The letter accused him of interfering with community activities and violating neighborhood harmony. It demanded that he pay fines for refusing access to the lake. At the bottom, Karen's signature was written in bold strokes, along with a warning that further refusal will result in legal action. Tom laughed softly. It was not a laugh of joy, but of disbelief. He had seen stubborn people before, but this was almost beyond reason. He placed the letter back in the envelope and set it aside. Later that afternoon, he drove into town again and brought the letter to the sheriff. The sheriff read it, sighed, and shook his head. This has no legal power. They can't fine you, and they can't claim your lake. If she keeps this up, we may need to take formal steps. Tom thanked him and returned home. He placed the letter in his growing file of evidence. But Karen was not slowing down. By Friday, rumors began spreading among the neighborhood. When Tom drove into town for supplies, he overheard people whispering near the market. Words like selfish, troublemaker, and strange floated to his ears. It was clear Karen had turned to gossip, trying to paint him as the villain. Tom stayed calm. He greeted the shopkeeper as usual, loaded his groceries, and drove back to the lake. He knew that truth needed no shouting. It only needed patience. That evening, as he sat on his porch, he noticed something new across the road. Karen had placed a banner in her yard that read, "Protect our community lake." Light shone on it, making it visible even at night. Tom shook his head slowly. It was clear she was digging deeper into her fight. She had lost with signs, with cleanup projects, with the dock scheme, and now she was turning to public opinion. But Tom was not worried. He had something stronger than her words. He had the law. 2 days later, Karen made her boldest move yet. Tom woke one morning to the sound of hammers. He rushed outside and saw workers setting up wooden posts near the entrance to his driveway. At first, he thought it was another sign. But when he walked closer, he realized they were building a small wooden fence across the entrance, blocking his access. Karen stood nearby, arms crossed, directing the workers. "This road is community property," she declared when she saw Tom. "We're putting up a fence to protect the lake. You can't just drive in whenever you want." Tom's patience, steady for so long, began to thin. He stepped directly in front of the workers and raised his hand. "Stop," he said firmly. "No one builds anything on this land. Not one post. If you put that fence up, you'll be removing it with your own hands by sundown." The workers looked at each other nervously. They had been hired for a job, but they could feel the tension. Karen snapped, "Ignore him. Keep working." Tom pulled out his phone and dialed the sheriff. Within 20 minutes, the patrol car arrived. The sheriff stepped out, looked at the half-built fence, and then at Karen. "I warned you," the sheriff said. "This is trespassing and destruction of property. If you don't remove these posts right now, we'll take this further." Karen's face turned red. She opened her mouth to argue, but the sheriff raised his hand. "Enough, you've been told before. This land belongs to Tom. The HOA has no rights here. If you continue, you'll be facing charges." The workers immediately began pulling the posts from the ground. Karen stood frozen, her fists clenched at her sides, her anger burning in silence. Tom watched quietly. He did not smile, he did not gloat. He only waited until the last post was gone. The sheriff gave him a nod and drove away. Karen turned toward him, her voice low but sharp. "This isn't over. You think the law will protect you, but I'll find a way." She stormed off, leaving the ground bare once again. Tom looked at the empty entrance. The fight had reached a new level. Karen had tried almost everything, and still she refused to accept defeat. As the sun set that night, Tom sat by the lake, the reflection of the water calm as always. He knew the final clash was still ahead. Karen's pride would not allow her to stop. But he also knew something else. The lake was his, and he would never surrender it. The sun was rising over the lake, spreading warm golden light across the calm water. The air was crisp, filled with the gentle sounds of birds and the rustle of leaves moving with the breeze. Tom sat on the porch with a mug in his hand, watching the reflection of the sky in his lake. For him, mornings like these were a reminder of why he had fought so hard to keep what was his. But this morning felt different. He knew that the conflict with Karen had reached its peak, and whatever happened next would decide how things would be for years to come. Karen had spent weeks trying to push her claims. Even after losing several arguments, she refused to back down. She had mailed letters, called meetings, and even brought a lawyer to his property once. Each time she had been met with facts, documents, and calm resistance from Tom. Still, she acted as though sheer persistence could make her the owner of something that clearly was not hers. That morning, Tom received a notice on his gate. Karen had planned what she called a community gathering by the lake. She wrote that the HOA would discuss future projects involving the water, and everyone in the neighborhood was invited to participate. The wording was clever, but Tom could see what she was attempting. By making it appear like the HOA was already in charge of the lake, she hoped to convince people that her version of reality was true. Tom knew this would be the final stand. He could not allow confusion to grow. The truth had to be shown in front of everyone once and for all. He walked inside, opened his cabinet, and pulled out a thick folder. Inside were the official land deeds, maps, and legal confirmations he had kept safe since the day he bought the property. Every inch of land around the lake was drawn and signed under his name. He placed the folder carefully into a leather bag and decided he would attend the gathering. By late afternoon, people began to arrive. The lake looked beautiful with sunlight, sparkling on the water, but the atmosphere was heavy with curiosity. Neighbors walked in small groups whispering about the meeting. Some looked confused, others annoyed, and a few seemed eager to see what would happen. Karen stood proudly at the edge of the water, clipboard in her hand, smiling as if she were the rightful host. She welcomed people warmly, shaking hands, nodding, and making small speeches about community spirit. She pointed at the lake and talked about potential improvements like benches, lighting, and fishing permits. Many listened politely, but some frowned, knowing that Karen had clashed with Tom before. Finally, Tom walked up. His calm presence drew everyone's attention. Karen's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly put it back on, greeting him with an overly cheerful tone. "Tom, I am glad you came. We were just discussing how wonderful this lake will be under proper care," she said. Tom didn't respond to her greeting. Instead, he turned to the neighbors who had gathered. His voice was steady, but it carried the weight of truth. "I want to make something very clear today. This lake, and all the land around it, belongs to me. It does not belong to the HOA. It is not shared property. It is not up for debate. I have owned it for years, and I have the legal documents to prove it." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Some looked at Karen with questioning eyes. She stiffened, raising her chin, and quickly replied, "That is not accurate. Our guidelines state—" Tom opened his bag and pulled out the folder. He held up the land deed for everyone to see. The official stamps and signatures glimmered in the light. He then laid out a large map on a nearby table, pointing at the lines that clearly showed the lake within his property boundary. "Here is the truth. The county records confirm it. The state confirms it. The law confirms it. The lake belongs only to me." Neighbors leaned in to look. They nodded as they read the documents, whispering among themselves. Karen's face turned pale, her confidence draining as the evidence left no room for argument. One man in the crowd raised his voice. "Karen, you told us the HOA had rights over this lake. You've been asking for dues. Were those claims even real?" Karen stammered, her words shaky. I was only trying to create order. I believed—" But her voice trailed off when she saw the disappointment in the eyes around her. People who had trusted her authority now realized she had been misleading them. Tom remained calm. "This is not about order. This is about respect. Respect for the law, and respect for what belongs to others. I have never stopped anyone from enjoying the view of the lake. I have welcomed peace here. But what I will not allow is someone to claim what is mine." Silence followed his words. The only sound was the soft lap of water against the shore. The truth was now clear to everyone. Karen could not fight it any longer. She tried one last effort, her voice thin with frustration. "You may have the paper, Tom, but this community deserves a say. It is not fair for one person to hold control over something so beautiful." Tom's eyes softened, but his tone stayed firm. "Fairness is not the same as ownership. You cannot take what is not yours and call it fair. This lake was my dream, my investment, and my home. Nothing gives you the right to rewrite that." At that moment, several neighbors stepped closer to Tom. One woman spoke firmly. "He is right. The proof is here. Karen, this matter is settled." Others nodded in agreement. The support around Tom grew, while Karen stood alone, her shoulders sinking. The authority she once carried seemed to vanish into the air. The gathering ended soon after. People thanked Tom for his clarity and began walking back to their homes, leaving Karen standing by the water in silence. She did not shout or argue anymore. She simply turned and walked away, her clipboard pressed tightly against her chest. As the crowd thinned, Tom remained by the lake. The golden light of sunset stretched across the water, painting it in shades of orange and red. The lake looked as peaceful as ever, untouched by the storm of conflict that had just passed. Tom sat down on the bench he had built years ago, breathing deeply. He felt no joy in defeating Karen, only relief. What mattered most was that the truth had been defended, and the lake remained safe under his care. From that day forward, the neighborhood grew calmer. Karen no longer made claims about the lake. She became quieter, less controlling, and eventually stopped trying to interfere with Tom. The neighbors, having seen the truth with their own eyes, respected Tom more than ever. The lake returned to its natural rhythm. Birds flew overhead, fish swam below, and the wind moved freely across the surface. For Tom, each sunrise and sunset was now sweeter, not because the conflict had ended, but because he had stood firm and protected what was rightfully his. In the end, the lake remained what it had always been, his place of peace, his sanctuary, his reflection of a simple truth. And no one could ever take that away.